In September 1980, Iraq invades Iran. Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein is convinced that now is the time to strike, since Iran is still shaken by its Islamic revolution, and he expects victory within weeks. Instead, the conflict will last 8 years, cost hundreds of thousands of lives, threaten world oil markets, and draw the US into the Persian Gulf for good. It's the last total war of the 20th century. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution hits the Middle East with a political earthquake. Under the Shah, Iran was a US ally, but his repressive rule leads to his overthrow. Iran is now controlled by Islamist forces fiercely opposed to the US. This change of regime also spikes tensions with neighboring Iraq. Iraq is ruled by 42-year-old dictator Saddam Hussein and the secular nationalist Ba'athist Party. He has recently displaced the previous leader and purged the party to make it more loyal to him. Most of Iraq's 13.5 million people are Arabic speakers belonging to the Shiite branch of Islam, though the minority Sunni Muslims control the regime. There's a large Kurdish minority in the north as well. In recent years, Saddam has cracked down on Iraqi Kurds and Shia insurgents who resent secular Sunni rule. Iran is much larger, with more than 38 million people, most of whom are Farsi-speaking Persian Shia. The country is led by spiritual guide Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the leader of the revolution that brought radical Shia Islamists to power. Iran also has independence-minded minorities, like the Azeris, Baluchis, Iranian Kurds, and Arabs of the Khuzestan region. Saddam sees the Iranian Revolution as an historic opportunity to gain an advantage over a suddenly weakened regional rival. It is more useful to hit the Iranians now because they are weak. If we leave them until they become strong, they will overrun us. Under the Shah, Iran was the Middle East's leading power, but now it's divided. Many Iranians, including much of the army's officer corps, oppose the new regime, and even within the government, hardliners argue with moderates. Iranian Kurds have risen up, and Iranian exiles in Iraq tell Saddam of the weakened state of their country's once mighty military following revolutionary purges of high-ranking officers. Some officers even try an anti-revolutionary coup in July 1980, which fails. The country's oil-based economy, usually much larger than Iraq's oil-based economy, is also suffering. Iraq fears that the revolution might spread to the Iraqi Shia majority. Iraqi authorities attribute several terrorist bombings to Iranian and Iraqi Shia extremists, while revolutionary leaders in Iran compare the Ba'athist Party to Nazism, Marxism, and fascism, and accuse Saddam of being a stooge of Israel and the US. Iranian militants also attack Arab institutions in Khuzestan. After Saddam executes a Shia cleric and expels tens of thousands of Iranians from Iraq in early 1980, Ayatollah Khomeini does not hold back. The Ba'ath Party regime is monstrous and perverted, a veritable little Satan that has put itself at the service of the great Satan. We want to create an Islamic state that reunites the Arab, the Persian, the Turk, and the other nationalities under the banner of Islam. Saddam is also an Arab nationalist and hopes to take on the role of unofficial pan-Arab leader if he can end the radical Shia threat from Iran and potentially conquer Khuzestan, which is also the home of Iran's oil industry. Both sides continue to support regional rebellions on the other's territory. Iran helps Iraqi Kurdish rebels, while Iraq supports Arabs in Khuzestan. Throughout 1980, there are border clashes on land and in the air. The focal point is a waterway known as Shat al-Arab in Arabic and Arvand Rud in Farsi, which allows access to the sea and forms part of the border. The two countries agreed to share the river in 1975, but in September 1980, Saddam declares it has been Iraqi and Arab throughout history and cancels the agreement. He's decided to gamble on a quick victory. Years later, there are rumors that the United States encourages Iraq to start the war to punish Iran for its revolution and ongoing US hostage crisis in Tehran, but this is unlikely as there is no conclusive evidence for this theory. The Iraqi plan is for a short campaign, since they know that a long war favors their larger neighbor. Saddam calls it a second Qadisiyya, a reference to the 7th century victory of Arab Muslim forces over the Persian Sassanid Empire. Iran will call it the imposed war or holy defense. Baghdad is confident its modern Soviet weapons and the anticipated uprising of fellow Arabs in Khuzestan will bring an easy victory. Head of Iraqi intelligence, Ali Hassan al-Majid, warned Saddam of the risks, but Saddam counters. Ali, why do you always bring me bad news rather than good news? Iraq has about 250,000 soldiers, 1,700 tanks, 1,300 guns, 2,300 other armored vehicles, and 295 combat aircraft. Iran has about 290,000 troops, 1,700 tanks, 1,100 guns, 1,900 other armored vehicles, and 420 combat aircraft. Their navy is also much larger than Iraq's. In terms of quality, Iraq's Republican Guard is Saddam's elite formation, but the rest of the army is relatively poorly trained, led by officers appointed based on loyalty and inexperienced in mechanized warfare. After Iran's revolution, many of its troops are also poorly trained and led by officers appointed based on loyalty. The new Revolutionary Guard will play a key role, though there is tension with the pre-war officer corps. The war will mostly pit Iraqi Soviet against Iranian Western weapons. Iraq fields some modern Soviet designs like T-72 tanks or MiG-23 jets, but most are older models. Iran does have modern Western equipment like F-14 jets, M60 and Chieftain tanks, but they will struggle to keep their US weapons in the field without American maintenance, training and spare parts. Saddam overrules his more cautious generals on airstrikes, in the hopes of repeating Israel's similar success in the 1967 Six-Day War. On September 22nd, the Iraqi Air Force hits Iranian airfields, even though they lack specialized munitions to take out reinforced hangars and radar sites. The army advances on several fronts, where they've built up numerical superiority of 2 or even 4 to 1. They push the Iranians back in Iranian Kurdistan, capture Qasr-e-Shirin to secure the road to Baghdad, and move into Khuzestan towards Ahvaz. The main targets, though, are Abadan and Khorramshahr, the heart of the Iranian oil industry and an important port. But these two cities are surrounded by waterways, and access is limited to 2 bridges, and the Iranians fight back fiercely. Iranian jets and Cobra helicopters strike at Iraqi spearheads, slowing them down. Iran even hits targets inside Iraq. One of them is the French-built Osirak nuclear reactor, which Iran fears Iraq is using to develop nuclear weapons, although it's not destroyed. Iraqi command mistakes also hinder their progress. The Iranians are disorganized but will stop the Iraqis short of Ahvaz. It takes the Iraqis 5 weeks of heavy artillery bombardments and bloody street fighting to capture Khorramshahr, which falls in November. Stranded cargo ship crews in Khorramshahr are involuntary witnesses.
Every day and every night, we stay on board and waiting that bomb will kill us.
But the Iraqis cannot drive the Iranians out of Abadan, and 200 of their vehicles get bogged down in the surrounding marshes, so they besiege the city instead. The local Arab population does not welcome the Iraqis as liberators, partly because of the destruction that their invasion has caused. So Iraq has risked an invasion of revolutionary Iran, but despite its military advantages, its forces do not get far and Iranian Arabs do not rise up. The United Nations Security Council adopts a resolution urging both sides to peace talks, but neither side agrees. Iran has weathered the initial storm and is now ready to strike back. The external threat rallies many Iranians to the cause, even some opponents of Khomeini or Christian minorities, though divisions and opposition do remain. Khomeini creates a Supreme Defense Council to coordinate the war effort, but it's deadlocked with infighting between President Abdul Hassan Bani Sadr and religious members until Bani Sadr is later ousted. Iran mobilizes all available forces, the regular army, the police, the Revolutionary Guards, and volunteer units known as Basiji. Clerics even visit schools to recruit volunteers, and Tehran releases scores of pilots imprisoned for supporting the Shah, some of whom it executes after they help stop the Iraqi offensive. Iran itself goes over to the offensive in January 1981 with mixed results. Iranian units push back the Iraqis near Susangerd, but an Iraqi counterattack surrounds and defeats them. They try again in the fall, attacking several times, and the Iranians recapture some ground and lift the siege of Abadan, but there is no great victory. Iran then launches its biggest operation yet in 1982. Many of its new troops are Basij volunteers, including ex-soldiers, but also boys, some as young as 12. Some motivated by religious fervor and loyalty to Khomeini, others by national pride, while some are naive and consider the war a game. Men are also coerced to join the war by other means.
I didn't want to join to the army force, but they forced me to come to battlefield because I wanted to continue my education and come out of Iran. They said, you gotta go to battlefield for 6 months. If you back alive, you can go out of the country.
The Basiji wear a piece of white cloth on their uniforms to symbolize their own death shroud, the traditional Muslim covering for the deceased, so that each one would be carrying his own death with him. Each also carries a plastic key from Khomeini to guarantee his entry into paradise. Basij units received rudimentary training from the Revolutionary Guards and are poorly armed, so the shock of combat hits them hard. 13-year-old Zahed Haftlang recalls his baptism of fire. When I saw the first corpse, I was shocked. I was so afraid. Kids my age who'd lost their hands, their legs, and whose stomachs were torn open or who were shot in the face. All I could do was hold their hands, cry, and pray for them until they died. But these volunteers are critical on the battlefield, in Iran's mix of new and traditional tactics. Basij units charge the enemy, often in mass formation and through minefields, to clear the way for better trained and armed Revolutionary Guard or regular army units. In some cases, they throw themselves onto barbed wire obstacles so that others can climb over them. This results in very high casualties, but is often effective given Iran's advantage in numbers. In March 1982, 120,000 Iranian troops assault Iraqi positions near Shush, and the Iraqis pull back to the pre-war border. More Iranian offensives follow, which culminate in the recapture of Khorramshahr in May. Iraqi Najah Aboud is in a bunker in the town when he's badly wounded. Around us everywhere there were big bombs, big fires. I tried to go out from the bunker, but I can't. I thought it was the end of my life. Lots of shrapnel hit my body. My head was bleeding badly. Later I hear weapons very close to me. It means they start to kill all who were alive. I started to shake. Iranian Basij Zahed Haftlang enters the bunker and comes across Aboud. I was afraid. Oh my God. I found one Iraqi soldier. He was full of blood. He was crying and begging me. I didn't know what he says. And he showed me his family picture. His wife, she was so beautiful, woman with a nice kid. That photo changed my mind. I made a decision to save that family. Aboud remains a prisoner in Iran for 17 years. After his release, he flees to Canada, where he randomly meets Haftlang in a counseling center, though he never finds his wife Aliyah and son Amjad after the war. The Basij units also get international attention when Iranian officer Hamid Zirakbash defects to the West.
12 years old until 17, 16, because over that age they know what's going on, and they don't go too much for Khomeini. I just can tell you that about 15,000 of them got killed, and thousands of them got injured and captured by Iraqis.
So by 1982, Iran has turned the tables and starts to push Iraqi forces back, though at great cost. In June, Saddam says he's willing to consider a ceasefire and withdrawal. But Tehran knows it has the upper hand and demands the end of the Ba'athist regime, the return of Iraqi Shia exiles, and reparations. Baghdad refuses, which opens the way for a new phase of the war. Iran's leadership agree that Iraq must be punished for its invasion, but disagree about what to do next. Revolutionary Guard leaders want to invade Iraq and think that Iraqi Shia will rise up and greet them as liberators. New President Sayyid Ali Khamenei, some religious leaders, and many regular army generals are more cautious though. They argue that Iraq has enlarged its army and still holds a firepower advantage. The hardliners prevail, and in July 1982, Iranian forces cross the border into southern Iraq. Their goal is Basra, the major hub for Iraqi oil. But in 2 weeks of fighting, they don't get far. Iranian forces lack artillery and air support, while Iraqi troops are motivated to defend their home soil and put their heavy weapons to good use. The Iraqis also use chemical weapons, which they will use multiple times during the conflict. Iraqi Shia do not rise up against their Sunni government though. Historians still debate why. Some say their Arab identity was stronger than their religious one, or that Saddam had already suppressed any potential leadership for an uprising. Most Iraqi Shia soldiers remain loyal and fight hard. Iran tries again in October and November 1982, but these operations also fail. 1983 sees more of the same, with several Iranian offensives gaining little ground. Iraq tries to cripple Iran's oil refineries by bombing them, but although this does damage Iran's exports, it does not damage Tehran's resolve. Iran now holds the initiative, so Iraq adjusts its approach to the war. Saddam and his generals realize they cannot achieve their initial goals, so now they accept a more static war and mostly go over to the defensive on the ground, hoping Iranian forces will exhaust themselves. Trench warfare becomes a common feature of the war, as do artillery duels and human wave attacks. These methods coexist with complex mechanized maneuvers and modern air warfare technology alongside small-scale ambushes in the 20th century's last total war. Months pass without any major ground operations from either side, setting the tone for the next several years. Iran has more manpower, but it has terrible logistics problems with its mix of existing US and newly imported Soviet-designed equipment. It also suffers from renewed purges of its officers by the regime. The Iraqis do launch many smaller counterattacks, and they benefit from superiority in the air. But their army's morale suffers under constant pressure and from cruel discipline and officer-class corruption. Both sides also launch popular fundraising campaigns for the war effort and intensify propaganda to shore up the home front. Iran mixed religious fervor with nationalist messages to resist the historical Arab invader. Children like Negin Shiragai are not spared. My childhood friends would say the war is great and how brave the people are. They would have family members who'd been to the war, and they were proudly saying what they did and how many Iraqi soldiers they killed. On television, we would watch a lot of propaganda, like we are the best country in the world. In October 1984, Iran pushes into the mountains east of Baghdad and gains some ground. In the context of the stalemate, this is a significant advance and puts pressure on the smaller Iraqi army. But the Iraqis are far from defeated. In March 1985, the Iranians attack towards Basra but make little progress. In February 1986, they capture the Fa Peninsula, which threatens Iraq's access to the sea. This is perhaps their biggest success since the recapture of Khorramshahr back in 1982, but follow-up attacks produce limited gains. Despite the exhaustion of both sides, neither side is ready to give in. In August 1986, Ayatollah Khomeini is still confident. We should neither submit to imposed peace nor to imposed arbitration. We should continue the war until victory, and it is near. After the failure of the Iranian invasion of Iraq, the conflict slips into stalemate again. While positional warfare and occasional local Iranian offensives dominate the fighting on the front lines, both sides look for a way out by opening new fronts and internationalizing the war. After Iraq's initial offensive fails and Iran hits back, Iraqi leadership is facing some tough choices. Their smaller population means they can't raise as many troops as Iran, and they fear they'll be ground down if they stay on the defensive for too long. As many Iraqi units as could be spared leave the front lines for training, and Saddam expands his elite Republican Guard for future counterattacks. Iraq also declares the Persian Gulf, also known as the Gulf of Arabia, into a war zone in late 1983. Starting the so-called tanker war. The Gulf is the lifeline of the world's oil supply, and Baghdad wants to force the United States and the Soviet Union to pressure Iran into ending the war. Iraqi forces blockade Iran's Karg Island port to prevent oil exports, but they also attack neutral tankers transporting Iranian oil. Iran wants to stop international support for Iraq, so it threatens to close the Strait of Hormuz and cut off the global oil trade. It stops neutral shipping to inspect for arms shipments to Iraq and places Chinese Silkworm missile batteries on its coast. The Soviet Union, the United States, and European countries are worried about another oil crisis like the one that damaged the world economy after the Yom Kippur War in 1973. So the US and several NATO members send warships to the Persian Gulf. The Soviet Navy also sends ships to escort tankers. Iran never does close the strait, but they board ships, attack merchantmen, and lay sea mines, which prompts several NATO countries to send minesweepers. In January 1987, an Iranian ship fires at the British tanker Isomeria.
One thing we do expect from the Iranians is the unexpected. It was earlier on this year that after an innocuous exchange, that the Iranian frigate wished the Isomeria a nice day, pulled back and then fired missiles at him.
Oil-rich Kuwait is so worried that it asks for its tankers to sail under the US flag for protection. At first, Washington hesitates, but when Moscow considers helping the Kuwaitis, the US agrees. The tanker war also brings diplomatic friction between the United States and France, since France provides Iraq with Mirage F-1 and Super Étendard aircraft with AIM-39 Exocet anti-ship missiles, which the Iraqi Air Force uses to sink commercial ships. On May 17, 1987, an Iraqi Mirage fires on American warship USS Stark, killing 37 crew. Baghdad apologizes and says the pilot mistook the frigate for an Iranian oil tanker. The next year, guided missile cruiser USS Vincennes shoots down an Iranian passenger plane while in Iranian territorial waters, killing all 290 people on board. The US claims the ship mistook the plane for an Iranian F-14 and later pays compensation. In September 1987, an Iranian vessel is caught laying sea mines off Qatar. After a US frigate hits one of those mines in April 1988, the US Navy launches Operation Praying Mantis, its largest surface fleet operation since World War II. 3 US Navy surface action groups, including aircraft from the USS Enterprise and US Marines and helicopters, attacked 2 Iranian oil platforms which also house military equipment and personnel. Iranian Navy vessels and fighter jets respond to the attack, and US forces sink or damage several. In retaliation, Iran fires Silkworm missiles, but the Americans shoot them down and both sides disengage. Until the end of the war, Iran and Iraq attack hundreds of vessels. Iraq sinks 54 cargo ships to Iran's 18, while many more are damaged. The tanker war increases international involvement and tensions, but does not lead to a 1973-style global oil crisis. Like the ground war, the tanker war ends up more or less stalemated. At the same time as tankers became targets, though, Iraq is also trying to force Iran to negotiate by striking at the home front, in what becomes known as the War of Cities. In 1984, Iraq decides to extend the war to Iran's major urban centers. Iran does not have enough air defenses to protect its cities against attacks by Iraqi aircraft and ballistic missiles. And the Iraqis hope that by terrorizing the population and showing the impotence of the revolutionary government, Iran will have no choice but to end the war. Iraq sends Scud-B and Frog-7 missiles, as well as air-to-surface munitions, into western Iran, including Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, and Tabriz. Iran responds, though it has fewer missiles and aircraft available, and hits Baghdad, Basra, and Kirkuk. Iraq even uses mustard gas and other chemicals in its attack on the Iranian Kurdish town of Sardasht in 1987, killing over 100, wounding several thousand, and condemning further thousands to years of health complications. The UN and US have already confirmed the use of such weapons several times earlier in the war, but a UN report fails to name Iraq as the user, in part due to US diplomatic pressure to not damage Iraq's position. A US official later reveals why. The use of gas on the battlefield by the Iraqis was not a matter of deep strategic concern. we were desperate to make sure that Iraq did not lose. The international community remains largely silent about Iraqi chemical weapons use during the war. There are accusations that Iran also produces and uses chemical weapons during the war, but they remain unproven. Early in the War of Cities, UN Secretary General Javier Pérez de Cuellar negotiates a stop to the attacks, but this agreement doesn't last long. The attacks take place in bursts of several weeks in 1984, 85, 87, and 88, usually initiated by Iraq. The recurring War of Cities devastates infrastructure in both countries, kills and injures tens of thousands of civilians, and lowers civilian morale. Iranian author Marjan Satrapi will later write about the civilian experience in her graphic novel Persepolis. So the land war is still bogged down, and the war in the Gulf and against civilians are now features for the rest of the conflict. It is these new fronts that make the most international headlines, but other powers have been indirectly involved in the war since the start. The Soviet Union has been Iraq's biggest weapons supplier before the war, going back to the 1960s, and it opposed the Iranian Revolution. But in 1980, it stops most arms deliveries to Iraq as it disapproves of the invasion. Once Iran seems to gain the upper hand, though, the USSR resumes supplying Iraq, but plays a muted role in the war overall. Officially, the United States is also neutral. It opposes both the Iranian Revolution and Iraq's ties to terrorist groups and Palestinian militants, and its long-standing relationship with the Soviet Union. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger allegedly sums up the US's ambiguous position. It's a pity they both can't lose. The US, though, sees Iraq as the lesser evil. It provides financial aid, intelligence, allows sales of US weapons to Iraq via other countries, and sends some dual-use materials that can be used by Iraq's military. Revelations that Iraq uses US loans to buy weapons later lead to the Iraqgate scandal. Another scandal erupts when the public learns of the Iran-Contra affair, where the US illegally sells arms to Iran. President Ronald Reagan hopes that this would get Tehran to pressure Hezbollah into releasing the Western hostages that it was holding in Lebanon and improve future relations with Iran. Following the suggestion of US officer Oliver North, the money from the sale is then used to illegally buy other weapons for anti-communist guerrillas in Nicaragua, bypassing the US Congress and the president. Reagan makes a humiliating public admission in 1987.
Secretary Shultz and Secretary Weinberger both predicted that the American people would immediately assume this whole plan was an arms for hostages deal and nothing more. Well, unfortunately, their predictions were right. As I said to you in March, I let my preoccupation with the hostages intrude into areas where it didn't belong. The image, the reality of Americans in chains, deprived of their freedom and families so far from home, burdened my thoughts, and this was a mistake. My fellow Americans, I've thought long and often about how to explain to you what I intended to accomplish. But I respect you too much to make excuses. The fact of the matter is that there's nothing I can say that will make the situation right. I was stubborn in my pursuit of a policy that went astray.
Jordan and Saudi Arabia support Iraq, since they fear Iran. Syria and Libya support Iran, since they fear an aggressive Saddam if Iraq wins. So does Israel, which had been allied to the Shah's Iran and now sees the Islamic Republic as the lesser evil, but hopes that the war will weaken both sides. Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin famously wishes both sides much success. And in 1981, Israeli jets even destroy Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor, which Iran had previously damaged. Tehran considers Israel a little Satan, but accepts Israeli military aid and expertise and allows Iranian Jews to emigrate to Israel. On the other hand, Iran supports Hezbollah after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. The arms trade booms despite the official embargoes. China, the US, the USSR, Yugoslavia, Italy, and others sell weapons to both sides. China is Iran's biggest supplier, followed by North Korea, Libya, and Israel. Iraq, which receives 3 times as many weapons, mainly buys from the USSR, France, China, Italy, Egypt, and Brazil. It also receives financial loans from the US, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE. Over the years, there are numerous efforts at peace negotiations, but all fail. After the UN resolution early in the war, US-Soviet talks in 1985 also lead nowhere. In July 1987, the UN Security Council adopts Resolution 598, proposing a ceasefire, withdrawal of forces, prisoner exchange, and a commission to determine responsibility for the war. Iraq agrees, but Iran demands that Iraq be declared the aggressor as a precondition. As the conflict drags on into 1987, international involvement in the Gulf heats up. At the same time, the ground war also intensifies. In 1987, the stalemate at the front continued, but so did the fighting and the frantic efforts by each side to win the war. Iran launches yet more offensives, including Operation Great Harvest, perhaps the largest operation of the war. Hundreds of thousands of troops clash around Basra, which the Iranians besiege for several months. An Iraqi officer describes fighting the Basiji. They chant Allahu Akbar, and they keep coming, and we keep shooting, sweeping our machine guns around like sickles. My men are 18, 19, just a few years older than these kids. I've seen them crying, and at times the officers have had to kick them back to their guns. Once we had Iranian kids on bikes cycling towards us, and my men all started laughing. And then these kids started lobbing their hand grenades, and we stopped laughing and started shooting. The outnumbered Iraqis throw everything they have into counterattacks, especially their superior air power, which destroys hundreds of Iranian armored vehicles. The Iraqis try to allow the enemy to penetrate in a certain part of the front and then hit them with artillery and armor, a tactic inspired by US practice. Improved Iranian air defenses, though, bring down dozens of Iraqi jets. Tens of thousands are killed and wounded, with losses 5-1 in favor of Iraq. The result is yet another stalemate. Meanwhile, Iraq continues its genocidal campaign against Kurds and other minorities in the north. By 1988, both sides are exhausted. Both economies are struggling, and Iran wrestles with 50% inflation. But they've also built up their forces. Iraq now has 800,000 men, 3,400 tanks, 4,500 other armored vehicles, 2,300 guns, 360 combat aircraft, and 140 attack helicopters. This Iraqi army is much stronger than the one that started the war 8 years before. It has more Western equipment, better logistics, better training, and its officer corps is much better. Iran has 850,000 men, 1,100 tanks, 1,400 armored vehicles, 900 guns, 60 active combat aircraft, and 40 attack helicopters. Iran's renewed mobilization does bring more troops, but desertion rates increase and it's lacking heavy weapons. Nearly half of the Iranian ground forces belong to the Revolutionary Guards and Basiji volunteers. Iran reignites the War of Cities using North Korean missiles, and about half of the attacks against urban centers in the entire war take place in 1988 alone. Iraq unveils its new Al-Hussein missile, a modified Soviet Scud-B with enough range to hit Tehran, and thousands of Iranians flee to the countryside in fear of chemical attacks. Iran also launches an offensive in Iraqi Kurdistan, which soon gains ground. In response, on March 16th, Iraq commits one of the most heinous crimes of the war. It attacks the Iranian-occupied Iraqi Kurdish town of Halabja with a mixture of chemicals, including the nerve agent sarin, killing up to 5,000 civilians. Resident Khairwan recalls the attack. I saw people lying on the ground, vomiting a green-colored liquid, while others became hysterical and began laughing loudly before falling motionless onto the ground. Later, I smelled an aroma that reminded me of apples, and I lost consciousness. When I awoke, there were hundreds of bodies scattered around me. Birds began falling from their nests, then other animals, then humans. It was total annihilation. This region of Kurdistan was home to part of the independence movement that Saddam ruthlessly put down in the mid-1970s, and which Iran supports during the war. Baghdad blames Iran even though Saddam ordered Hassan al-Majid, known after as Chemical Ali, to carry it out as part of a wider campaign of genocide and so-called Arabization. The attack, though, does stop the Iranian offensive. It's clear that the war cannot continue for long, so in April, Iraq launches a final offensive to gain a better position in any negotiations. Their forces recapture the Fa Peninsula, inflicting heavy losses on the Iranians and taking out a silkworm battery. The leftist Iranian resistance group, known as MEK, and fighting alongside Iraq, launches 2 small offensives as well, but its initial gains around Mehran are soon crushed. Iraq has nearly exhausted its available manpower, so Saddam claims the Fa Peninsula victory justifies accepting a ceasefire. Iran blames its losses on a lack of heavy weapons, aircraft, and anti-aircraft defenses, problems for which it has no answer given its international isolation. Tehran is worried about its economic problems, potential Iraqi chemical weapons attacks on Tehran, and US pressure in the Gulf. Finally, both sides agree to the UN ceasefire conditions, which Khomeini compares to, quote, drinking poison. The fighting stops on August 20th, 1988, and the Iran-Iraq War, the last total war of the 20th century, is over. According to conservative estimates, Iraq loses about 180,000 killed, 520,000 wounded, and 70,000 taken prisoner. Iranian losses are much larger, with 500,000 dead, 1.3 million wounded, and 45,000 prisoners, though some estimates of the total dead are as high as 2 million. Millions of survivors are traumatized for life, like Iraqi army medic Ahmed al-Mushattad. I dream about it until now. Those nightmares that there's somebody I try to help and I can't, and last minute I lose him. And sometimes I dream I've been killed. I still smell the smoke of the battle. You can't forget. It stays with you forever. Overall, the war is estimated to have cost more than $1.1 trillion, including infrastructure damage, weapons purchases, and lost oil revenue. Iraq alone suffers $230 billion in damage, a sum that would take more than 2 decades to raise, even if the country's entire oil wealth were dedicated to reconstruction. Even after the 1988 ceasefire, the war continues to cost both sides billions as they stay mobilized during numerous rounds of failed peace treaty negotiations. Iraqi troops finally withdraw from Iranian territory in 1990. Saddam builds a victory monument in Baghdad and announces that this victory will be remembered for 1,000 years. But who really won the Iran-Iraq War? Iraq started the war with visions of a limited strike that would bring it oil wealth and regional power. But by the end, it was deeply in debt, had gained no territory or oil resources, and had become more unstable. Opposition to Saddam's regime had increased, even though he was still in control. He did, though, stop the potential export of Iran's brand of political Islam for now. Iran had suffered more, but arguably gained more from the war in spite of its failure to fully defeat a smaller enemy. It had preserved the Islamic Republic and consolidated the revolution against its foreign and internal opponents, despite Khomeini's death in 1989. Long term, Iran arguably came out of the war in a better strategic position than Iraq, but the region is far from stable. Western naval forces are in the Gulf for good, and Saudi Arabia has emerged as an unfriendly regional power. A fearful Iran sees itself isolated and on the defensive, which convinces some leaders it should accelerate work on its nuclear program and support Shia movements in Iraq, Lebanon, or Yemen. Many Iranians believe that Iraq acted on behalf of the West and the Soviet Union, contributing to animosity and suspicion. A weakened but overconfident Saddam still has a massive military, and now turns against the Iraqi Kurds in another campaign of genocidal repression. He also turns to a wealthy and vulnerable neighbor to make up for his failed gamble, restore his prestige, and settle his massive war debts, the Emirate of Kuwait. He accuses the Kuwaitis of slant drilling for oil underneath the Iraqi border, and there are rumors of a meeting with the US ambassador. Soon, the Ba'athist regime's army will be on the march again, for the last time. On August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein stuns the world when Iraq invades Kuwait in a surprise attack. But 6 months later, the Iraqi army is on the run from US-led coalition forces in the First Gulf War. So how does Saddam's victory in Kuwait unite Western, Arab, and even Soviet states against him and lead to a crushing defeat in just 100 hours of war? In 1988, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein signs a ceasefire ending a bloody 7-year war with Iran. Iraq had suffered 600,000 casualties, achieved limited gains on the battlefield, and now faces crushing debt. Baghdad owes foreign creditors $80 billion, and it will cost $230 billion to rebuild destroyed regions. His million-man army, the fourth largest in the world, costs an unsustainable 40% of annual GDP. There's high unemployment, and perhaps worst of all, oil prices are low. Saddam wants OPEC to raise them, but the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait refuse in order to protect their own profits while depressing prices. For Hussein, these are major threats to his rule. He depends on high military and social spending, and cuts might provoke unrest or lead to internal challenges. Already throughout the 1980s, Saddam has violently repressed often Shiite minorities, such as the Faili Kurds, for their supposed support for Iran. But the solution to his security and financial woes might come from a much smaller neighbor. Kuwait holds $10 billion of Iraqi debt and overproduces oil, so Saddam reasons that he can demand cash and debt cancellation to solve his financial crisis. He also pressures the Gulf states, claiming that the Iran-Iraq war protected them from radical Islam and that Iraq therefore deserves financial compensation. In February 1990, Saddam urges Jordan and Egypt to pressure the Gulf states for $30 billion in exchange for regional stability. To make his threat clear, Iraq holds military exercises on the Kuwaiti border. In May, Saddam increases the pressure even more at a Baghdad summit. For every single dollar drop in the price of a barrel of oil, our loss amounts to $1 billion a year. War is fought with soldiers, but it is also done by economic means. Therefore, we would ask our brothers who do not mean to wage war on Iraq. This is in fact a kind of war against Iraq. We have reached a point where we can no longer withstand the pressure. The Emir of Kuwait calls Saddam's demands absurd. Frustrated, Saddam turns to military solutions. On July 15th, 3 Iraqi divisions of 35,000 troops and over 300 tanks moved towards the Kuwaiti border. Saddam declares Kuwait is conspiring with, quote, world imperialism and Zionism, and legitimizes military action as protecting the pan-Arab nation. The Kuwaitis reject what they call threats and extortion. The Gulf states, worried about escalation, ask the United States not to respond too strongly. On July 17th, the US confirms it will uphold the sovereignty and integrity of the Gulf states. It fears Iraqi dominance in the region will jeopardize oil security, threaten Israel, and undermine the sovereignty of other, smaller, oil-rich nations. By July 27th, the Iraqis have 100,000 troops on the Kuwaiti border, but the threat is widely dismissed as pure coercion. All the assurances we got said not to worry. Yes, there's a bit of a problem. Yes, the Iraqis are posturing, but they would not attack an Arab brother. You should not worry about this. But the US and others have misjudged Saddam's intentions. On August 2nd, 1990, his troops move into Kuwait. At 2 a.m., the Iraqi Hammurabi and Medina armored divisions cross the border with 1,000 T-72 tanks, while Iraqi Republican Guards commandos land in Kuwait City by helicopter. They face minimal resistance from Kuwaiti garrison troops and a small air force. By the end of the day, the Emir of Kuwait flees, while his brother is killed protecting the royal palace. 48 hours later, Saddam fully occupies Kuwait, stealing $2 billion from the Kuwaiti central bank and doubling Iraqi oil reserves. The UN Security Council unanimously denounces the invasion and demands Iraqi troops withdraw. Saddam hopes a rapid victory will prevent opposing forces from mobilizing, but instead it draws Western, Soviet, and Arab leaders together. By invading, Saddam loses credibility with Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, and the overthrow of a Gulf monarchy alarms the kings of Saudi Arabia and Jordan. Above all, Iraq has disrupted the balance of Middle Eastern oil production and put national incomes at risk. In the West, Saddam's invasion is seen as blatant aggression against a friendly state. American defense officials also worry Iraq might attack Saudi Arabia, which would further threaten oil supplies. It's a stark turnaround from limited US support for Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War just a few years before. Even in Moscow, a former Iraqi ally, the invasion is a surprise. Like the Americans, the Soviets have investments in Kuwait. Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev informed Saddam that the Soviets will not support him. Iraq has conquered Kuwait, but with powerful and neighboring states turning on Baghdad, Saddam's strike now looks like a reckless gamble. On August 6th, the UN imposes an embargo on Iraq, which relies on oil for 90% of its national budget. The same day, King Fahd of Saudi Arabia allows American troops to deploy in Saudi territory to deter Iraqi aggression. For the moment, it's doubtful that Saddam actually intends to invade Saudi Arabia, but the Saudis are rattled by events. On August 8th, American President Bush addresses the nation.
At my direction, elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, as well as key units of the United States Air Force, are arriving today to take up defensive positions in Saudi Arabia. I took this action to assist the Saudi Arabian government in the defense of its homeland. First, we seek the immediate, unconditional, and complete withdrawal of all Iraqi forces from Kuwait. Second, Kuwait's legitimate government must be restored to replace the puppet regime.
Saudi Arabia agrees to host and supply US-led coalition forces. Jordan is opposed to Iraq's growing power and bears the brunt of refugees fleeing Iraq amid the fear of an escalating conflict. So they and other Arab states offer support and troops to the coalition as well. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher is eager to intervene, while France is outraged after Iraqi troops stormed the French embassy in Kuwait and also joins. As up to 200,000 Kuwaitis and other nationalities flee into Saudi Arabia, they bring with them claims of widespread looting and killing, which provides an additional moral basis for intervention. However, widely reported testimony of Iraqi troops killing babies by removing them from incubators are later exposed as fabrications of the Kuwaiti public relations campaign. Saddam tries to split the growing coalition before it can fully mobilize. First, he hopes to separate the Arab states by claiming that Israel, which most consider an enemy, controls the United States. Israel deliberately stays out of the coalition to avoid provoking the Arab members, though. Second, Saddam takes hundreds of foreign nationals from 49 different countries as hostages. He says he'll guarantee their safety if the US and its allies don't attack Iraq, but the move backfires as it pushes the coalition towards military action. Meanwhile, more countries pledge support to the coalition, from single planes and ships to financial assistance and troops. In total, 42 countries join, with the United States, UK, France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Kuwait taking the lead. With the coalition building up forces, Saddam orders his army to build defensive positions around Kuwait, and the line in the sand is drawn. To support the coalition, a massive logistical operation is underway in Saudi Arabia called Desert Shield. Saudi ports are at maximum capacity as American military shipments arrive 24/7. Engineers build new highways for thousands of convoys and equipment from 1,000 cargo planes. Within 90 days, the US alone ships ammunition, uniforms, medical equipment, and food for 157,000 troops, along with tanks, artillery, helicopters, and combat aircraft. The US military prepares a 1,000 square kilometer training area for acclimatizing the troops. The entire operation consumes more than 75 million liters of fuel every single day. Alongside this massive American force, Egyptian, Syrian, Saudi, and British divisions also begin deployment with support from other allies. Meanwhile, 10 Iraqi divisions dig in along the front line in depth, including trenches filled with oil, large minefields, and artillery pre-sighted at choke points. Saddam's elite Republican Guards Corps provides the strategic reserve, while regular Iraqi divisions garrison the front line. Saddam, thinking of the Vietnam War, hopes that casualty-averse Western nations won't be willing to risk attacking well-fortified defenses. On December 6th, he announces the release of all remaining foreign hostages in an attempt to stop the coalition from launching an attack. Instead, the UN sets a deadline for him to withdraw by January 16, 1991. Some coalition partners are concerned Saddam may now only partially withdraw, retaining some influence in Kuwait but delegitimizing a coalition intervention. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney underlines the US is ready to strike.
That doesn't mean a partial withdrawal. That doesn't mean he gets to keep 10% or 20% or 30% of what he stole. It means the full, complete, total withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait. Is that he needs to be aware that the president will have available to him a full spectrum of capabilities. And were Saddam Hussein foolish enough to use weapons of mass destruction, the U.S. response would be absolutely overwhelming and it would be devastating.
In the end, Saddam ignores the ultimatum since he's determined to hold on to his conquests despite the looming coalition threat of military action. The coalition now launches Operation Desert Storm. At 3 a.m. on January 17, 1991, coalition forces begin a massive air campaign over Iraq. 2,430 coalition aircraft, including 323 American carrier-based planes, take to the skies. Iraq's air defense network of hardened bunkers, anti-aircraft guns, surface-to-air missiles, and 300 interceptor aircraft is hard-pressed to stop them. First, Apache helicopters and missiles target Iraqi radar installations, blinding anti-air defenses and allowing for the main attack. In the first day, the coalition launches over 1,300 sorties, including with F-117 stealth jets. Over the first 3 days, they suppress the Iraqi Air Force, targeting 44 airfields and over 500 aircraft shelters. Surviving Iraqi jets flee as the coalition secures air supremacy. Lieutenant Colonel Waldo B. Cummings Jr. describes his first mission. As we penetrated Iraqi airspace, I looked down and saw the biggest light show I'd ever seen. Continuous lines of red and orange tracers covered the black void below us. It seemed that every Iraqi who could put his finger on a trigger had pressed down and wouldn't let go. They were surface-to-air missiles fired blindly in the hope that one would hit something. Several miles from the target, I pushed the nose of my aircraft down into a 30-degree dive as Condor, my bombardier navigator, picked out his aim point on the radar. The target below was engulfed in flames and secondary explosions. Baghdad is hit hard with bombs and cruise missiles, including strikes on Iraq's presidential palace, government ministries, and Saddam International Airport. Confused by decoys and targeted with anti-radar bombs, Iraqi defenses downed just 12 American aircraft in the entire campaign. Iraqi frontline troops are worried about what's going on at home, as one soldier from 3 Corps noted in his diary. One says they've destroyed Baghdad and demolished it. Others come to pacify you, saying nothing has happened there. They've only bombed the military installations. Others say they've bombed civilian buildings. You don't know who to believe and who is lying. All news reports are hallucinations. They're all lying. The truth is lost. In response to the coming coalition invasion of Kuwait, the Iraqi military sets demolition charges on hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells to destroy Kuwait's infrastructure. Some oil wells are also hit during the aerial bombing campaign. The thick smoke covers the entire area, causes massive pollution, and darkens the sky even during the day. Iraq also unleashes its arsenal of tactical Scud missiles. On January 18th, they launched the first of 86 Scud missiles at Israeli and Saudi Arabian civilian and military targets. Saddam hopes to fracture the delicate coalition by drawing Israel into the conflict against the wishes of the US and Arab states. U.S. Commander General Norman Schwarzkopf, though, downplays Scud's military significance and claims Israel well understood the provocation.
Because, I frankly would be more afraid of standing out in a lightning storm in southern Georgia than I would be standing out in the streets of Riyadh when the Scuds are coming down. If it's going to hit you, it's going to hit you, but the percentages are so much less. I think the state of Israel understands that the exact objective Saddam is trying to obtain by attacking them with Scuds is to bring them into this war. And if they were to come into this war, they are in fact doing exactly what Saddam wants them to do, and that's certainly not in the best interest of everyone involved.
Despite the Scud's inaccuracy, the Israelis take the threat seriously and take precautions. Ultimately, they stay out of the conflict, partly because the US pledges billions of dollars of military aid and sends Patriot air defense batteries. Schwarzkopf also sends out SAS and Delta Force teams to hunt down the Scud launchers. Saddam also takes other steps to provoke the coalition into costly attacks, launching a cross-border raid into the Saudi town of Khafji on January 29th. Although the Iraqis briefly occupy the town, coalition forces backed up by overwhelming air power quickly recapture it. The Khafji battle illustrates the power of coalition air power, which now goes on a theater-wide offensive. From January 24th to February 24th, 40,000 attack sorties target command centers, naval installations, oil facilities, electric infrastructure, logistics, and Iraqi troops within so-called kill boxes. These pre-established sections of the front line are assigned to aircraft, which can rapidly respond to strike targets. Up to 80,000 Iraqi conscripts desert under the bombardment, which also destroys 1,385 Iraqi tanks, 930 other armored vehicles, and 1,155 artillery pieces. On February 24th, 500,000 coalition troops with 340 attack helicopters, 2,000 tanks, and 2,000 armored vehicles move in, supported by massive air and sea barrages. They plan a large left hook movement to cut off Kuwait and the Iraqi army from behind. American Central Command, CENTCOM, takes charge of the western approaches with American, British, and French forces. Arab and American Marine units focus on the east. Meanwhile, Marine landing craft prepare a fake amphibious landing. The ruse keeps 2 Iraqi divisions on the coast when the coalition force attacks. In the west, the French 6th Light Division and American Airborne divisions push forward rapidly. The 101st Airborne alone attacks over 270 kilometers into Iraq using over 300 helicopters. Iraqi troops on the front line are demoralized after weeks of brutal air attacks and high rates of desertion. By evening, airborne forces have already cut Highway 8 between Baghdad and Kuwait, moving so quickly that Iraqi troops offer little resistance and often surrender en masse. In the center, American and British units launch direct attacks. Their goal is to take the Iraqi logistics hub of al-Busayya and then turn east to encircle the Iraqis. Tanks mounted with bulldozer blades push through Iraqi berms and plow tons of earth into Iraqi trenches, burying some soldiers alive. Cutting 24 routes through the minefields, they create a 16-kilometer breakthrough zone. Iraqi armor and artillery, devastated by air attacks, is unable to respond effectively. Marine divisions push through rain, fog, and the choking black smoke of Iraqi oil trenches lit by American napalm. They break through Iraqi defenses, and over 3,000 Iraqis surrender almost immediately. The 1st Marine Expeditionary Force advances over 30 kilometers into Kuwait, takes over 10,000 prisoners, and captures Al-Jabar airfield. By the end of February 24th, coalition troops break the Iraqi front line, but the fight isn't over yet. The Iraqi Republican Guards Corps in reserve now deploys to stop the coalition from breaking into the rear. Overnight and throughout the next day, coalition forces advance across the front. Syrian, Egyptian, and Saudi forces are slower, but push forward with the support of the US 1st Cavalry Division. The Marine divisions fight off large Iraqi counterattacks with minimal casualties. In one of many tank battles, 13 M1A1 Abrams tanks destroy 35 Iraqi tanks in just 90 seconds. American armor proves more than a match for Iraqi T-55, T-60, and T-72 tanks. With a 120mm main gun and depleted uranium armor-piercing rounds, the US M1A1 Abrams can penetrate the armor of any Iraqi tank. Stabilized barrels allow well-trained tank crews to fire while moving, and thermal vision equipment offers a major advantage over Iraqi tanks fighting in the smoke of burning oil wells. But the fires also cause problems for coalition forces. On February 26th, as the coalition continues to encircle Kuwait, on the flank of another massive tank battle, American armor collides with forward elements of the Iraqi Republican Guards' Tawakalna division. In thick smoke from the oil fires, paired with strong desert winds, aerial reconnaissance is hampered and ground visibility is low. American Bradley APCs and Abrams tanks fight against Iraqi BMPs and T-72s at very close range. Only on the 27th is the coalition able to break through for good. 2 American soldiers are killed in the battle, both by friendly fire. American armor overruns Iraqi positions, destroying 30 T-72 tanks in fortified positions. American radar also tracks Iraqi artillery positions, and US guns destroy them with counter-battery fire. The rapid pace of the advance surprises the Iraqis, who are expecting a direct assault from the south rather than the west.
We're located about right here at this northeast cloverleaf. We swung up from right through here by the airport, came around and then hit them from behind. And because when we came over these positions around here, most of them were oriented towards the south, like they were expecting us to come up right through the city. And there was not a whole lot of resistance. We hit them at night, and they weren't able to really shoot at us or see us.
By the end of February 26th, coalition forces have defeated 24 Iraqi divisions. As Iraqi troops retreat from Kuwait City, they're trapped on the highway to Baghdad by coalition air power. Hundreds of stolen cars and military vehicles clog the road as mostly US planes strafe and bomb the column into twisted wreckage. Images of the so-called Highway of Death make headlines around the globe. Some Iraqi soldiers have already abandoned their vehicles, but many others are killed. The next day, the 24th Division captures the Talil and Jalibah air bases despite Iraqi resistance. Highway 8 sees its own Highway of Death scenes as coalition aircraft ambush panicked Iraqi armor and soldiers attempting to flee or redeploy to the west. The Iraqi army has almost completely collapsed under the coalition assault. American, Saudi, and Kuwaiti units move into Kuwait City, and the Emir of Kuwait requests his own troops enter the city as the main liberators. Before the Kuwaitis can rebuild their destroyed infrastructure, they still have to put out the oil fires, which will take months. The Iraqi army is reeling, and Saddam Hussein's regime is shaken, but it's still intact. As Saddam's forces retreat into Iraq, President Bush and the coalition need to make a decision. The war isn't over, and fleeing Iraqi forces are regrouping. But the coalition's purpose is to eject Iraq from Kuwait, not pursue them into Iraq or overthrow Saddam's regime. It's likely some coalition partners, especially Arab states, oppose an invasion of Iraq. One possible solution is to support regime change. With Saddam's rule in crisis, previously repressed ethnic and religious minorities sense an opportunity, and the US encourages them. Radio station The Voice of America promotes uprisings in mid-February, which President Bush reiterates on February 24th. Partly encouraged by such statements, a diverse range of groups in Iraq begin to mobilize against Saddam. Then, on February 28th, the coalition in Iraq agree to a ceasefire. Bush now makes it clear the coalition's objectives have been achieved and combat is over.
Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny. I am pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations.
In early March in Basra, disgruntled Iraqi soldiers, including many Shiites, turn against government troops, buildings, and prisons, with the support of much of the Shia-majority city. The partly spontaneous revolution soon spreads to other Shia cities in the south. In the north, Kurdish Peshmerga militias also rise against Saddam. Helped by army defections, they seize most northern Iraqi cities, often without a fight. Unlike the Basra-based revolution, the northern uprising has a more organized political agenda, including democracy for Iraq. Soon, there are revolts in 14 of Iraq's 18 provinces. The coalition members disagree, though, on how to react. The US prefers a coup, but wants an intact Iraq to keep arch-enemy Iran in check, rather than have the country break up. Eventually, they send humanitarian aid, some limited ground forces in support of the Kurds, and establish 2 no-fly zones over Iraq. Baghdad and Sunni-majority cities in the so-called Sunni Triangle largely remain loyal, as does the well-armed and mostly intact Republican Guard. Both the northern and southern uprisings are made up of many different political organizations, interest groups, and religious and ethnic groups. Although united on the overthrow of Saddam, they can agree on little else, including a power-sharing deal offered by Saddam on March 7th. By late March, Saddam's loyalist troops are on the offensive. Against fragmented revolutionary organizations, they crush many of the uprisings by early April. They used tanks and helicopter gunships, not destroyed by the coalition earlier and permitted in the ceasefire agreement, to suppress the lightly armed rebels and kill fleeing civilians. There are also widespread claims of the indiscriminate use of chemical weapons. The few remaining US troops in Iraq near the Kuwaiti border do not interfere directly, but they destroy captured arsenals to prevent them from getting into rebel hands. Some northern Kurdish groups do hold out, eventually creating an autonomous Kurdish region under the protection of both Iran and the no-fly zone. Some revolutionaries feel betrayed by the lack of expected US support.
I think we are disappointed, really, not only by them, but also by the Allies' position. We think that during the war, everybody knew that Saddam Hussein is the cause of what happened in the Gulf, and even some of them, they asked Iraqi people to uprise, to go up and get rid of Saddam Hussein. But when the Iraqi people got up and had the uprising in all parts of Iraq, they got away and they said this is an internal affair, we don't interfere.
The situation is made worse by the continuation of the economic embargo, which damages Iraq's economy and public health. After Saddam's victory over the rebels, some influential Iraqi exile groups will pressure the US to finish the job started in 1990. For the coalition in February 1991, the Gulf War almost seems like the perfect intervention. Casualties are low, public support remains high, its political objectives are rapidly achieved, and they built and maintained a diverse global coalition. The casualty count is a testament to the lopsided nature of the conflict. The coalition loses 292 killed and 776 wounded, roughly half through friendly fire or accidents. The Kuwaiti army loses 420 killed and 12,000 captured. Estimates for Iraqi numbers are 20 to 50,000 killed, more than 75,000 wounded, and 80 to 175,000 captured. Over 1,000 Kuwaiti civilians are killed or missing, and over 3,000 Iraqis are killed during Desert Storm and Desert Shield. A further 5,000 Iraqi troops and loyalists are killed in the Iraqi uprising, while up to 180,000 civilians and rebels are killed by government action or starvation. Coalition veterans begin to suffer from so-called Gulf War syndrome, with symptoms similar to chronic fatigue or nerve gas poisoning. There's still debate about its causes, with theories suggesting oil well fires, depleted uranium rounds, anti-nerve agent drugs, or exposure to nerve agents on the battlefield, either via deliberate Iraqi use or the destruction of Iraqi facilities. Up to 250,000 US veterans, over a third of the combat force, report symptoms. Operation Desert Storm liberates Kuwait but doesn't stop Saddam from cracking down on internal opposition and leaves him with the tools to do so, killing and displacing hundreds of thousands. Most of the coalition troops leave in 1991, though a few stay behind to maintain some control over Saddam's regime and prevent Iraq's total collapse. The Gulf War has created new and complex problems, and immediately there are voices in the US government dissatisfied with the results, which they will try to rectify in the future. Saddam's invasion of Kuwait happened just as the Cold War was ending, and it was in that moment that the superpowers of the world agreed in the UN Security Council, something that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. Mikhail Gorbachev was trying to modernize the USSR, but ultimately failed. Some argue in part because of the economic cost from the Chernobyl disaster of 1986 and its aftermath. Iraq's 1991 defeat by a US-led coalition set in motion a series of events which would ultimately lead to another US invasion in 2003. But this new invasion was not just a continuation of 1991. New leaders, revived disputes, and the shock of the 9/11 terrorist attacks all result in one of recent history's most controversial wars. So why did the US invade Iraq again? After the end of the Gulf War in February 1991, the United Nations Security Council adopts Resolution 687. It requires that Iraq pay reparations, destroy all chemical and biological weapons and missiles, and not pursue nuclear weapons. Together, these weapons are called weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs. The UN imposes economic and military sanctions until Iraq complies with the resolution. During the Gulf War, Saddam gave orders to prepare chemical and biological weapons, including 1,200 chemical aircraft bombs, 13,000 gas artillery shells, 8,320 Grad rockets loaded with nerve agents, and 25 biological weapon rockets. Coalition troops trained to fight on a chemical battlefield.
We've never been put into a position where we've actually had to go into combat in a chemical environment before, so this is all new to us. We've got new equipment, newer style gas masks. We train, we practice, we go through the gas chambers, but we've never really applied ourselves as a combat unit.
Facing bullets is one thing, and facing chemical gas, the threat of it is another. It just, it just seems like they're cheating.
But Saddam does not use these weapons, although he previously did in the Iran-Iraq War and against rebel groups within Iraq, including civilians. After 1991, UN inspectors also uncover a former Iraqi uranium enrichment program. Some in Washington, including President George H.W. Bush, want to depose Saddam, but many countries oppose this. So Bush seeks to withdraw troops and create a post-Cold War system based on international cooperation.
But I would repeat here, I do not want to send out the impression that U.S. troops will be permanently stationed in the Gulf. I want them back. So we're still working, we're just beginning to work out these security arrangements, but a part of it will not be a continued presence of substantial quantities of U.S. troops. I'd like to see them all out of there as soon as possible, but there's some shorter run security problems that I don't want to underestimate.
But the US and some allies are still militarily involved. They airdrop aid and create 2 no-fly zones to protect suppressed Kurdish groups in the north and Shia tribes in the south. Saddam's repression isolates Iraq, and sanctions bar selling oil or importing industrial and medical equipment which could have military uses. Agriculture and health suffer, causing up to 500,000 Iraqis to die of disease and malnutrition. Some experts, though, argue these figures are exaggerated or exacerbated by Iraqi actions in order to gain sympathy. Iraq claims to destroy all WMDs, but inspectors cannot confirm this, and they complain of poor cooperation and potential deception. So UN sanctions continue during President Bill Clinton's policy of containment, although an oil for food program allows Iraq to sell some oil. In 1998, UN inspectors request to search off-limits areas like presidential palaces. Saddam refuses and accuses the inspectors of cooperating with US and Israeli intelligence, and in some cases, this is true. Saddam expels the inspectors, triggering a US and British military response known as Operation Desert Fox. In December 1998, US and UK forces hit suspected Iraqi weapons facilities with 600 bombs and 415 cruise missiles. Clinton also signs the Iraq Liberation Act, providing support for exiled opposition groups.
So long as Saddam remains in power, he will remain a threat to his people, his region, and the world. With our allies, we must pursue a strategy to contain him and to constrain his weapons of mass destruction program, while working toward the day Iraq has a government willing to live at peace with its people and with its neighbors.
Russia, France, China, and some Arab nations condemn the attack. Russia, China, and France want to reduce sanctions, probably because they want lucrative oil concessions. Some Iraqi neighbors, like Jordan and Turkey, also smuggle Iraqi oil. By 2000, Iraq is arguably recovering, with oil sales doubling GDP per capita between 1997 and 2000. The CIA concludes Saddam is secure against internal threats and that he's rehabilitating his international standing. In January 2001, George W. Bush, son of former President George H.W. Bush, becomes president. His campaign focused on domestic issues, but this all changes on September 11, 2001. The 9/11 terrorist attacks forced the Bush administration into action. US intelligence identifies terrorist organization al-Qaeda, led by exiled Saudi Osama bin Laden, as responsible. In the 1990s, al-Qaeda had launched attacks against US interests to protest US support for Israel and military presence in Saudi Arabia. In October 2001, US forces invade Afghanistan, where bin Laden lives. The US administration also links al-Qaeda to Iraq. The 9/11 attack was much more sophisticated than earlier bombings, causing some to suspect state sponsorship. Although Bush never explicitly says Iraq is directly responsible for 9/11, US officials point to Iraq's WMD history, claiming Iraq could provide terrorists with devastating weapons. It's a powerful argument in the post-9/11 environment of American insecurity and anthrax attacks. In January 2002, Bush calls out a so-called axis of evil.
North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror, while an unelected few repress the Iranian people's hope for freedom. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. This is a regime that has already used poison gas to murder thousands of its own citizens, leaving the bodies of mothers huddled over their dead children.
Bush's approval rating reaches 90%, the highest ever recorded. But US intelligence struggles to link Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. The CIA claims Iraqi government links to Iraq-based al-Qaeda operative Abu Musab al-Zarqawi and 9/11 plotter Mohammed Atta, but evidence is weak. Instead, experts conclude al-Qaeda and Iraq are generally opposed. Bin Laden, for example, declared Iraq as heretical for its secularism. Others claim Saddam is a rational actor who doesn't want to attack America. Professor Adam Cobb is among the critics. The president and others have repeatedly said that Saddam could hand over WMD to al-Qaeda. It is certainly technically possible, but they have never provided more than vague innuendo to suggest what incentives Saddam might gain from doing so. This is because the proposition does not bear scrutiny. Some government figures later retract statements linking Iraq to 9/11, but in October 2002, 66% of Americans believe Iraq assisted the attack. The same month, US Congress authorizes force against Iraq, with 97% of Republican and 57% of Democrat senators voting in favor. There are many reasons the US invades Iraq in 2003, but the key elements include an acute sense of danger, neoconservative opportunism, Bush's presidency, and Iraqi miscalculations. Iraqi possession or pursuit of WMDs forms the central US argument. The US claims Iraq breached the 1991 ceasefire after expelling inspectors in 1998 and may hand WMDs to terrorists. Many countries in Europe and the Middle East are also concerned about Iraqi WMDs. So British Prime Minister Tony Blair and US Secretary of State Colin Powell encouraged Bush to take a diplomatic approach via the UN. In November 2002, the UN Security Council unanimously passes Resolution 1441 under US pressure, demanding the return of weapon inspectors. Importantly, the resolution does not allow for the use of force and gives Saddam a final opportunity to comply. Saddam accepts, and UN and International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, led by Hans Blix and Mohammed El-Baradei, return. They often visit sites based on US intelligence, but find no WMDs. Could there be 100% certainty about the existence of weapons of mass destruction, but 0% knowledge about their location? The CIA did not see 9/11 coming, so it's under pressure to find Iraqi WMDs and prevent another potentially more devastating attack. Intelligence figures do not fabricate evidence, but they are affected by political priorities, media pressure, and public fears, meaning they give more weight to evidence linking Iraq and WMDs than evidence to the contrary. Much of the intel they focus on is faulty, especially from Iraqi exiles who want to remove Saddam or seek personal gain. One important Germany-based asset, Rafid Ahmed Alman, also known as Curveball, provides detailed information on supposed mobile biological weapons labs. German intelligence doubts the story, but the CIA accepts it. As Blix explains, it's hard to disprove something exists. The mobile bioweapon production units have become a big ticket. Some have told me that the information is not all that solid. Without evidence, how do we know? I was asked in the council whether it was plausible, and I said yes. After all, we are told that the Russians did it in rail cars. But it is strange that no satellite pictures or other pictures were taken. Only human stories. The US also ignores expert skepticism and accepts British claims that Iraq bought uranium from Niger. The documents related to the case are later shown to be frauds. Although some US intelligence officials insist that much of the intel can't yet be confirmed, government officials publicly release it anyway. The US intelligence community is also fragmented. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Douglas Feith establishes a rival intelligence subgroup within the Pentagon which aggressively promotes evidence of Iraqi WMDs. The CIA develops a national intelligence estimate reinforcing many WMD claims. It says there is no link between Saddam and al-Qaeda, but also suggests Saddam could forge one if he wanted to. On February 5, 2003, Powell presents US findings to the UN Security Council. His presentation includes much of the under-verified information, like the mobile labs, and shows photograph captions more certain than the evidence allows. The US administration and media celebrate the presentation as a smoking gun, especially intercepted conversations like this one.
إبراهيم رفع عبارة عوامل الأعصاب أينما وردت في التعليمات اللاسلكية زيني صارتي.
However, the international observers and experts like Blix are not convinced. Our analysts felt they were not impressed by Powell's presentation, and even less by the intelligence we have been acting on. No one will give Iraq the benefit of the doubt, but it is hard for any outsider to feel that the intelligence provided has weighed heavily. Although insecurity undoubtedly influenced US policy, some academics argue neoconservative opportunism drives American action. This argument focuses on officials like Vice President Dick Cheney, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, his deputy Paul Wolfowitz, and advisor Richard Perle. They're supported by think tanks and academics who develop an ideology of unilateral American military intervention to directly support US economic and strategic interests. Some neoconservatives oppose the 1990s containment strategy, support exiled Iraqi opposition, and advocate Saddam's removal. They claim multilateral cooperation with allies hindered US actions in Kosovo and elsewhere, undermining American credibility. Influential think tank Project for the New American Century even suggests before 9/11 that an event like a, quote, new Pearl Harbor could galvanize American military rearmament and dominance. Some therefore argue that 9/11 is an opportunity to set up a pro-US Iraqi client state and promote Israeli interests, which many neocons firmly support. Some State Department diplomats oppose the neoconservatives and persuade Bush to seek another UN resolution. But initial success in Afghanistan and widespread public and political support reinforces the pro-war neoconservative position, which claims Iraqi ceasefire breaches authorize US military action. Some also argue that oil plays a role. Iraq has around 60% of known oil reserves at the time and is much cheaper than US-produced oil. US reliance on Middle Eastern oil has also increased from 8% in 1985 to 21% in 2001. Some critics claim neoconservatives want to use American military power to maintain unsustainable oil consumption at home. Other critics say the US priority is preventing French, Russian, or Chinese access to Iraqi oil reserves. Academics also argue neoconservatives promote a militarized, unilateral form of liberal democracy. Bush adds democratizing Iraq as a justification for the war, but this is not very persuasive for the American public. Even so, neoconservatives hope democracy can revolutionize the region, aid Israel, allow the US to withdraw troops from Saudi Arabia, and improve US security. They also assume advanced weapons and a grateful population will make regime change relatively low cost, as Cheney explains in 2002. We have great information. They're going to welcome us. It will be like the American army going through the streets of Paris. They're sitting there ready to form a new government. The people will be so happy with their freedoms that we'll probably back ourselves out of there within a month or two. There are political scientists who counter-argue that the neoconservatives were not so influential. Frank Harvey argues that many Americans from across the political spectrum promoted regime change. He says Democrats like Bill Clinton and Al Gore supported regime change and would also have invaded had they been in power post 9/11. Some writers also suggest that critics of the neoconservatives are actually trying to retroactively mask their own support for the war. Neoconservative writer Robert Kagan agrees. Prominent intellectuals, both liberal and conservative, have turned on their friends and allies in an effort to avoid opprobrium for a war they publicly supported. Politicians have twisted themselves into pretzels to explain away their support for the war, or better still, to blame someone else for persuading them to support it. An extension of the neoconservative argument also claims Bush oversees a shift in US doctrine which dooms international cooperation and made invasion of Iraq more likely. The idea of the Bush doctrine focuses on so-called preventive war, attacking an opponent before they can gain the means to potentially attack you. The US claims the right to attack Iraq based on previous treaty violations, even if Iraq was only seeking to develop WMDs without yet having them. In a 2002 speech, Bush claims older strategies of deterrence no longer apply. For much of the last century, America's defense relied on the Cold War doctrines of deterrence and containment. But new threats also require new thinking. Deterrence means nothing against shadowy terrorist networks with no nation or citizens to defend. Containment is not possible when unbalanced dictators with weapons of mass destruction can deliver those weapons on missiles or secretly provide them to terrorist allies. Some commentators claim the Bush doctrine is a radical departure from a post-Cold War rules-based system anchored around international organizations like the UN. Although Bush wanted UN resolutions to appease allies, he always maintained the right to act unilaterally. Others highlight an element of ideological and religious righteousness to his international interventionism. Opponents of this view argue the UN-based consensus system was already deteriorating before the Iraq War, and the Bush doctrine is not a fundamental departure from previous US policy. They see Clinton's 1998 Operation Desert Fox as an example of preventive war. Others, like Christian Alfonsi, argue Bush's personal history is more relevant than his political views, especially Saddam's attempt to assassinate his father in 1993. This fixation on Saddam ran through the Bush dynasty like a malignant strain of DNA, a pathogen always a threat to appear under the right conditions of crisis. But the US alone did not dictate events, since Iraqi actions also played a role. It's now known Iraq destroyed its WMDs before 2003, so why didn't it just say so? Part of it comes down to Saddam's distrust of the weapons inspectors. Iraq provides information on WMD disarmament in 1991 and expects sanctions to be lifted. But the information is insufficient by UN standards, so the sanctions stay. Some experts suggest Saddam, who's a convinced anti-Semite, suspects a US-Israeli conspiracy, a belief reinforced when some UN inspectors pass information to US and Israeli intelligence. As a result, Iraq destroys documents cataloging its disarmament, which will be a problem for later inspectors. In 1992, Saddam concluded Iraqi cooperation achieves little. One of the mistakes some people make is that when the enemy has decided to hurt you, you believe there is a chance to decrease the harm by acting in a certain way. I have given them everything, the missiles and the chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. They didn't give us anything in exchange. Well, they have become worse. By 1998, Iraqi officials claimed the inspections are a cover for other US and British intentions.
Why should they continue this rhetoric about the possibility of concealment of chemical or biological weapons? This does not serve the purpose of disarmament. It serves the purpose of the aggressive policy of Washington and London. So it is not a United Nations purpose. It's another purpose, which is part of the policy of 2 member states in the Security Council who would like to hurt Iraq politically, economically, by all means, including the use of force.
Instead, some argue Saddam adopts a deterrence strategy based on purposeful WMD ambiguity to deter his main threats: Iran, Israel, and his internal opponents. Frustrating UN weapons inspectors helps maintain credible ambiguity, while sharing information may expose Iraqi scientists and facilities to attack. This fear is based on past experiences. Iran and Iraq continue low-intensity conflict. Israel bombed the Iraqi Osirak nuclear reactor in 1981 and likely assassinated Iraqi scientists. After his 2003 capture, Saddam explains to interrogator George Pirro, "You in America do not see the world that confronts Iraq. I must defend the Arab nation against the Persians and Israelis. The Persians have attacked regularly. They send missiles and infiltrations against us. If they believe we are weak, they will attack. And it is well known that both the Israelis and Persians have nuclear bombs and chemical bombs and biological weapons." Saddam also probably believes WMD ambiguity deters the US, which he thinks fears high casualties. Until March 2003, he also thinks any US military action will be like Operation Desert Fox, which his regime survived and arguably benefited from domestically. Standing up to the US internationally also might increase his standing with Arab powers. As a result, some experts conclude Saddam greatly miscalculates 9/11's impact on US attitudes. A 2002 US poll reveals 77% favor war to destroy Iraqi WMDs, with 56% supporting invasion, even if the US suffers thousands of casualties. But Saddam remains focused on historical threats and continues to believe Cold War-style deterrence limits US actions, when in fact WMD ambiguity may actually be provoking them. Saddam's half-brother writes in his diary, "Saddam in his public or private life uses the edge of the abyss policy. The method is similar to playing Russian roulette. This is his mentality and his management style." He later states, "I've tried time and again to get my brother to understand that the world has changed and that we will be internationally completely sidelined if we can't find a solution that we, the Americans, and the Israelis can live with. But I might as well be talking to the wall." Iraq's Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz later tells interrogators Saddam was skilled at handling internal issues, but ignorant of international relations. He also claims Saddam's belief, including his confidence in his own armed forces, largely came from sycophantic advisors seeking favors. Whatever the reason, poor Iraqi cooperation means that by early 2003, Hans Blix cannot confirm Iraqi compliance, even though he has not found any WMDs.
Well, I'm not catering for anybody, neither for Bush or for the Iraqis or for the UK or Moscow. I'm catering for the Security Council. We serve the whole Security Council, and I'm trying to tell the truth, such as it is. There are some good things to say about what the Iraqis have done. I think they have a decision that they will meet us on procedure, and I do not quite see a determination yet to try to clear up the many questions of the past.
Only in February 2003, after pressure from Russia, does Saddam improve cooperation, including destroying some banned conventional missiles. By now, though, Bush has formed a multinational coalition of the willing supporting an invasion, although most do not commit troops. The UK provides the second biggest armed contribution, followed by Australia and Poland. But most of the world opposes an invasion. Russia, China, and France make it clear they will veto any further UN resolution. US public opinion is in favor, but in some other coalition members, support is much lower. In mid-February, arguably the largest wave of global protests in history opposed the war, as some 35 million people take to the streets in 90 countries. Hans Blix developed specific criteria to confirm Iraqi compliance and says he can implement his plan by April, a proposal many states support. Colin Powell, however, says it will take too long. US military priorities take over, since if it wants to invade, it must do so before the summer heat or risk keeping its massive troops in Kuwait even longer. Unlike in the 1991 war, US troops expect to fight in urban environments like Baghdad.
This is close quarters combat here. Three-dimensional fight, you have basements, you have 3, 4, 5-story buildings, you have furniture that's involved when you go in and clear, you have civilians on the battlefield, you have cars in the way. I mean, all the stuff that comes with a place like New York City, like Frankfurt, like London, you have to deal with all that stuff.
On March 17, 2003, Bush gives Saddam and his sons 48 hours to leave Iraq, or the coalition will invade. Saddam refuses, and on March 20th, airstrikes target Baghdad and coalition troops invade Iraq. But as US-led forces advance, most do not race to secure suspected WMD sites. Instead, US tanks rush for Baghdad with the aim of finishing the job started in 1991, eliminating Saddam Hussein's Iraq.